You talk a little bit about examining mindsets in this, how
Mm.
important. I'm thinking of just the intersection of mindsets and narrative and story.
Mm.
Tell me a little more about how this is pivotal in
Yeah,
helping people grow in their organizations.
yeah.
What do you do
So
with that?
one of the pieces of research I did when I was sort of building integrative development was kind of looking at the research on what actually improves performance at work. So I did sort of a meta-analysis of a number of authors and research projects and sort of identified five variables that were consistent across all of the research. And so um, it was identity, behavior, environment, aspirations, and mindsets. Um, Aspirations was most commonly called motivations, but then I made a funny acronym, so I changed it to aspiration, which I liked better anyways, because motivation is a bit of a stigmatized word in a way. But so I created this framework called I-beam, just like I-beams for creating buildings.
Sure.
And so whenever we're approaching an issue for an organization or a team or a person, we're always looking at it through this I-beam lens, like where are they already strong? Maybe they've got a really strong mindset, but their environment's completely counterproductive for them. So we know to spend extra energy on environment. Mindset's so important. Mindset and identity in particular is so important because they're at the core of how people unconsciously behave every day. I'm not a big fan of trying to change behaviors cognitively. Most behaviors emanate from subconscious stories, somatic experiences. And so around mindset, we know for in our own lives and through all the research that we see not what's present, but we see what's in our stories. That really profoundly shapes what we even notice. And again, it goes back to what I shared before about you could have five members of a family tell you the story about the same event, tell you five different stories. Why? They saw different things depending on their mindset at the time. And the greatest example, an easy example would be like I was sharing about the disabilities organization. When you have a mindset of I'm the expert and you're not, that drives the framing for all of your behavior, all of your processes in the environment, your sense of identity as a practitioner, and what you're motivated to go do, right? So if I want you to change any of those things, I've got to get you to first see yourself and the world through a different mindset. And so in all of these projects, we don't teach them anything in the beginning, really. We have a very brief, small program on ethnography, mindfulness, and observation, basically, to help them, and a little bit about coaching mindset then. So we just send them out to the organization. Just notice your organization through this mindset, through this lens. What do you see? And they're like often like their eyes. We do that. Well, no wonder, you know. And then there's this exploration of how would you like to change that, and where would people find the greatest value if you were successful at changing that? And then we set these projects in motion, and we only provide learning and development resources as they're asked for to enable them to deliver on what they've discovered, not because we think they should know that. But if we can look at all five of those variables, if we just take a medical mindset and a coaching mindset, they each generate different behaviors, different structures, different habits, different identities. And so, like I said, mindset's where it's all began. How do you see and narrate your world? What are the consequences of that? What if you built up around that to sustain that? And if you want to bring about change, what would have to be different about your story?
Yeah, yeah, and it's so unconscious for most of us that
Mhm.
we even have a mindset. We just
Yeah,
take it to be this is the way it is, and until we
yeah.
have,
So that's and as you would know, that's why we gather stories, because if you ask somebody what's your mindset, they have no idea.
yeah,
If you say tell me a story about that, their mindset becomes obvious because it's the frame through which they told their story, and they're telling it to you right now.
yeah,
Yeah,
and there's an
yeah,
opening for possibility there.
you bet.
Yeah. You talked as a little last couple pieces, you talk about the bigger story. And is this
Mm,
really, so you have the individual mindsets and then you have the organization's bigger story. What do you mean
yeah.
by the bigger story?
Well, I mean, I've most of my career, I've tended, for the most part, to work for purpose-driven organizations in, healthcare, education, government, and but even some organizations trying to do things a bit differently around sustainability or culture or whatever. And I found the bigger story for me is, what is the real purpose of why you're doing this, either this activity like a leadership program. And I think about, I did some work for the largest bank in Australia. It's not one of my normal clients, but I had a really amazing opportunity to do some really innovative culture change work with them. And as part of that framing, they're the oldest and by far the biggest bank in Australia. So I did a little bit of historical digging about the history of the bank, and saw that they had twice before been kind of pioneers. And part of their difficulty at that point in their history was they'd kind of stagnated as the biggest player. They could sort of afford to do that. So I went back and I said, in the beginning, you introduced the banker, the idea of a banker, right? And you and what that meant and what that looked like. And then several decades later, you really pioneered the whole notion of the bank, a branch and neighborhood banking. And you didn't have to have a banker, which only the rich people could have. Anybody could have a banker and a branch. And I said to them, I said, the opportunity you have before you now is to lead the way again and redefine banking. And so each of those has a bigger story. It speaks to their culture, their operations, their people in that time. The problem was that they were trying to make a lot of changes, but they had not really understood that banking itself was fundamentally changing. And and so a lot of what we helped them to do to discover that was to help them to begin to imagine, what could a branch become.
Right.
um, and so for me, the bigger story is helping people tap into the real purpose for why they're doing what they're doing, either as an organization or say for this leadership or change program. And so I think about a very well-known athletic apparel company. Back in the day, they were putting in their first enterprise-wide software system, and their pilot did not go well. So they rang me up, and the woman who was their training director for their global platform called and said, "Dave, just come talk to us. We've had this really fancy consulting firm, but they don't know why this isn't working either. But just come talk to us. I think you'll be able to figure this out pretty quickly." So I did. And a lot of that had to do with helping them to recognize the bigger story about what this change actually meant. So they were going from, I think it was 28 proprietary individual software systems to one. So the minute they flipped that switch, 28 kings and queens of their fiefdoms lost their jobs and their power. So nobody bothered to account for that, and the fact that they might resist. Also, probably even more significantly, nobody had planned for, well, who's going to be in charge then? Because the kids, if you will, that were actually going to be in charge of the new system often didn't have formal titles, didn't have power and authority, didn't have anything that they would need. And so there was bedlam in a way. And so the bigger story is not only, this is not about the software. That's the easy part. It's the software is requiring you to make some fundamental adjustments in your culture. And so that bigger story allowed them to understand why their pilot had worked. And so then by helping them to address those using some narrative coaching work we did with them, they were able to address the three cultural factors that were in their way, such that they were able to mitigate the downsides of them and move forward and be successful with the rest of the project.
That's a great example. Yeah, that's a beautiful example.